Hi, my name's Robin Zagurski. I'm an artist here at the Hot Shops. I'm in Studio 201. I'm usually only here Friday through Sunday because I have a day job. I work in both oil and cold wax, and if you watched Lori Elliott Bartle's video, you will have seen her techniques with that. But I also work in encaustic, and what encaustic is, it is beeswax that is, and this is beeswax that's mixed with Damar Resin. This is Damar Resin, and we melt it and we put pigment in it. And the pigments are things like powdered pigments, or they can be oil paints. Sometimes I use oil stick and melt that. There's a lot of ways that I can pigment the material I'm working with. But before we get into that, I want to go into some safety issues, because this is not something that you can just run out and buy the materials for and do at home and be safe. So whenever I'm working with pigments, I wear a mask. So you guys have all seen an N95. This one's a P95, which means it'll filter out oil particles. And these are oil-based paints. I use a torch, and I use that torch on the surface that I'm using, a sheet of drywall, and because it is fire retardant. So that's another safety issue. Just in case it does catch fire, I have my fire extinguisher always ready to be used. Luckily, I've never had to use it. What we do with encaustic is a material that was developed by the ancient Greeks. So we know it's been used since like 800 BC. It started out as the beeswax that was used to caulk the hulls of ships so the ships wouldn't sink. And it wasn't that hard for them to figure out, hey, if I throw pigment in this, I can start painting the masks on the hulls, so that, you know, those mermaids that were swimming through the ocean on the side of ships, that was painted with encaustic. Some Greeks moved to Egypt and took the encaustic techniques with them, and so in Egypt they started painting the sarcophagi of of the mummies. So sometimes, you think that you've never seen encaustic before and you think it's new, but if you've been to a museum, it's likely that you have seen encaustic. People will ask me, how long will this last? Well, we've had pieces that have lasted 3,000 years. So what we do is we melt this, and I can't imagine how the Greeks and the Egyptians did this when they didn't have a hot plate like I do, or a portable torch. But we melt it, and then we fuse it to board, and usually we're doing it on board. There's special techniques for doing it on other kinds of surfaces. So I've already prepared this board with just plain wax. I mean, it's the encaustic wax, but it's just clear. And then the next step is to prepare it with about 3 layers of the white wax. We want it to look like fondant. So if you watch baking shows, when they're making their cakes with a layer of fondant icing, that's what we're trying to do. And so we always move from the same direction. And we try not to overlap, and we try not to drip, but even if I do, it's not that big of a deal. I can always just scrape it off. A lot of people say that, that they're not creative, and I want you to remember, when you watch these kind of videos, you're watching an artist who has been doing this multiple times. So this is one layer that's on there, and I'm not going to finish this one up. I'm going to just go ahead and work with one that's already done. What I want to do is do a seascape. I like to do seascapes, and I like to paint water. So I'm going to take this, and generally when we're painting water, what we want to think in terms of there are 3 layers to water. A lot of people will put down a layer of blue and then think that doesn't really look like water. Well, it doesn't look like water because you haven't included the deep layer, the middle layer, and the top layer of the water. So what I usually do is that I start with my lightest color when I'm doing encaustic, and as much translucency as I can. So I'm going to start with this kind of turquoisey, cobalty color. So this is encaustic. It's, like I said, it's wax. And I'm just going to brush in just a little of this, and I'm not caring how this really looks yet. I'm gonna take that horizon up a little bit, and then we use a torch. Now, depending upon what I want to do with the torch depends upon how big I want the blue cone area to be. When we're doing encaustic, it works best if you go over the whole piece instead of trying to just work on one little section, because it never really works very well to just melt one section and then try and make it still look smooth and even. Now, if you're working with something that you want to have a lot of texture, you can play with that. But with this particular technique that I'm doing, that doesn't work well. And this is the part that's pretty relaxing to watch. So each layer of wax that gets put down gets fused to the previous layer, and we do that with heat. Now, I've got something sticking in my wax over here that I don't like, and that's why we have dental tools. So when you go to your dentist, you can ask them to give you their leftover tools, because once they get really dull, they can't use them anymore. And there's one other spot I want to take out. Now these I can kind of spot weld. And the other thing I'm looking for are these pinholes where the air escapes from the board underneath. And eventually I want all of those gone. I want to put in an island. So we're just going to put in one little island in there. It's my Bob Ross imitation. We're just going to put in a little island. It's going to be happy. And I'm going to fuse that down. You can, like I said, you can make your own pigments, your own encaustic wax. There's also some companies that you can buy from. One of my favorites is Evans, and they make this color that I'm completely in love with. My son gave it to me for Christmas one year, and you can see I kind of blotched that up a little bit, but I can go back in and smooth that out. Oops. Don't put it in the green by mistake. That would be not good. So I'm going to use this tool, which is usually used for clay, and I'm just going to smooth some of this out. The next thing I want to do is I want to go back in and put in another layer of the water. So this is the deeper color of the water, but it's going on last. And I'm going to check it to make sure that, yeah, I want it to be translucent, so I dilute it down with more wax. But as I go over it, it makes it look like you can see a deeper area of the water. And I'm not being real careful about where I put this, obviously, because there's always room to sort of move things around. one of the reasons that the artists at the hot shops encourage people to explore art in some way is because it's good for your soul, it's good for your head. I'm gonna brighten up my land a little bit. There's a psychologist by the name of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who was a Hungarian-American, who spent World War II imprisoned, and he wanted to be, his interest was in how do people survive things like that and how do they move forward and enjoy their lives. And he got into art and psychology, and he found that when people were really, really engaged in something that they were doing, whether it was a sport or whether it was art or Sudoku or crossword puzzles or whatever, they entered what he called a flow state. And flow state is when you're sufficiently challenged to need to pay attention to something, but you also really, really enjoy it. And if you don't enjoy it enough, then you're going to quit because you're going to get anxious. And if you doesn't challenge you enough, then you're going to quit because you're bored. But in a flow state, we lose track of time. It's when you're so involved in doing something that you don't realize that you skipped lunch. So we want to encourage people to do things that help put you in a flow state. It increases your level of happiness. It increases your level of resiliency. It helps you survive things that are tough. And especially now at this point in time, we want to make sure that we are working toward growth. So at this point, I'm going to add some pigmented shellac. And so what we're just using is regular bullseye shellac. I use clear mostly, but I do have some amber. And we pigment it with actual pigments. So, they look like this. They're a powder. I'm not going to open it up because I don't have a mask on or gloves. And I paint those on in a couple of different ways. So I'm going to, put a little amber along the edge of where the land meets the water. And that has got to dry. And then I'm going to do a little this green. And also, just for a little fun, a little magenta, purple, I don't know what this is. And that has to dry, and that takes about 10 minutes to dry. So this is a time when I want to adjust the flame to do exactly what I want it to. And the shellac has dried to a certain extent. And as you see, it bubbles. I'm going to go in and put in what I want the water to do. So the water, the foam on water, also has layers. So I'm going to put in some foam here. And I'm going to put in some waves, which is another reason why what happened with that amber is not going to be that big of a deal. You know, generally what really attracts me in anything is color. You know, if something is really brightly colored or it's sparkly in some way, usually that'll kind of trip my triggers and make me want to do something with it. I always love painting water, so anytime that I'm anywhere near water, I'm usually taking pictures. This particular piece that I'm doing is actually from a friend of mine, took some photos in Ireland, and I painted a postcard for them this week, and I decided that I'd use that as my example today. And I just want to remind people that, you know, if I didn't like this at all, I could go all over it with white and start all over again. You know, there's very few forms of art that you can't redo in some way. Maybe sculpture. I guess if you're chipping away at marble, that probably wouldn't work very well. So what I'm going to do next is I want to hit this with a deeper color again. So that I get a little distance going. When that cools just a couple more seconds, I need to go back over it and seal it all in. With clear encaustic medium. Otherwise the shellac would peel off at some point. And, you know, you can see that, you know, if you can follow this, I don't know if you can or not, you have to be careful with this part because the shellac will still move underneath this wax if I go over it too slowly or too close. You know, in order to sort of balance myself, I need to do something like art. You know, and everybody needs balance in their lives, and it goes back to that idea of a flow state, and that gives my brain a little rest, and we all need that. The point of painting or any kind of art is to have fun and to enjoy the process.